Okay, so we're diving into all things Julius Rosenwald, which I have to admit, when you send over those excerpts from Julius Rosenwald, though you built Sears, Roebuck, and advanced the cause of black education in the American South, I kind of thought,
Yeah.
oh, the Sears guy?
Yeah.
But this deep dive, it sounds like we're going way beyond just like retail therapy and catalogs, right?
Really is. It's so easy to, only think of the Sears catalog, which, don't get me wrong, was iconic. But what we're going to uncover here is the man behind the merchandise, the driving force, really, behind Sears' incredible growth, and then his kind of surprising dedication to social change, which is really fascinating.
Yeah. And that's what jumped out at me, because most people, if they even know the name Rosenwald, probably picture like department stores, mail order, that whole world, not necessarily philanthropy on this huge scale.
Exactly. And that's what makes his story so interesting. He wasn't, born into immense wealth, despite what people might assume. His upbringing was very solidly middle class.
Okay.
But a key detail, his father worked in the clothing trade. So Rosenwald had this hands-on business experience from a young age.
That was a great point. So it's not the silver spoon situation some might expect.
Right.
He's already learning about business, quality, what customers need, all of that, way before Sears is even a thought in his head.
Exactly. It gave him this deep, ingrained understanding of how business worked, which makes his choice to join Sears, not to found it, but to join at this really specific point in its growth.
Yeah.
All the more fascinating, I think.
And talk about a pivotal moment, because the Sears catalog, that was revolutionary, right? I mean, it transformed how people, especially in rural areas, could access goods. Suddenly, boom, the world of products is at their fingertips.
It really was. And Rosenwald, he's instrumental in making this huge operation actually work efficiently. He was a visionary when it came to systems, organization, all this stuff we take for granted today.
Totally.
But back then, customer trust, guarantees, you get this thing, and if you don't like it, you can return it. Revolutionary stuff that he helped make the norm.
It's amazing to think those weren't always standard practices,
Right.
But what really stood out to me going through this was his thing about treating employees fairly. He's writing letters about this decades before it was common.
Oh, absolutely.
That says something about the guy, I think.
It really does. You get a glimpse into his values there. It's not just about the bottom line. Building a business that treats people right, from factory floor to the folks getting those catalogs, that mattered to him.
Yeah.
That's key to understanding who he was, not just what he achieved.
So we've got this image of Rosenwald, the innovator, the guy ahead of his time and how he runs his business. Then these excerpts, they take this whole other turn, right? He goes from changing how people shop to wanting to completely change education. What is that about? What sparked that passion, especially for schools in the Jim Crow South, of all places?
Yeah, you've hit on something really key to his story. We have to remember what's going on at the time. It's the early 1900s, Jim Crow South. Segregation is law. Black Americans are facing discrimination everywhere they turn, but especially in education, right?
Right, makes sense.
Schools for black students were underfunded, often in terrible condition. It was a system designed to hold them back.
Which is the total opposite of what he's doing at Sears, with systems inefficiency.
Exactly.
So how does he go from catalogs to classrooms? Is this just a case of a rich guy wanting to give back?
It's way deeper than that. The biography really highlights this one moment. He reads Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up from Slavery.
Okay.
And it clearly makes a huge impact on him. This idea of education being the path forward, it resonated with Rosenwald.
That tracks. I mean, Booker T. Washington was a monumental figure, right?
Absolutely.
Advocating for black advancement through education, setting up the Tuskegee Institute.
Exactly. But here's the thing about Rosenwald and giving. He wasn't just signing checks. He was deeply involved, shaping the programs he supported, obsessed with making sure they actually worked.
Yeah, he was in business almost.
Exactly. Remember those before and after pictures of the schools?
Oh, yeah, those were striking.
That was his idea.
Really?
He understood how powerful that visual was.
Showing people, look what's possible.
Exactly. And it went beyond that. He'd personally review budgets, making sure the money was being used right, down to the dollar.
Wow.
Not just investing in buildings, investing in the future,
And then, this is where I thought it got really interesting, the test schools thing.
Oh, yeah.
He funds these 6 schools, but it's like a pilot program, right?
Yeah.
To see if his ideas are actually working.
It wasn't charity. It was let's gather data, see if this scales up, and the community matching funds requirement. genius.
Because then it's not just him imposing his vision.
Right. It's like, we're doing this together, which this actually ties into a bigger thing happening then, the scientific giving movement.
Oh, yeah, I was thinking about that. Like,
yeah,
trying to apply data and analysis to make philanthropy more effective.
Exactly. Less about just giving, more about using your head to make the biggest difference. Rosenwald's in line with that, but what sets him apart from guys like Carnegie, Rockefeller, is how he actually gave.
Because those names, you think, massive endowments, foundations, right, like their money's still out there doing its thing.
Right, and that's the key difference. Carnegie, Rockefeller, they believed in setting that money aside, let it generate more money, fun stuff forever.
The gift that keeps on giving approach.
Exactly. Rosenwald, though, he was adamant about giving while he was alive, seeing the impact firsthand.
It's like he brought that same energy from the business world to his giving. You know, like, I want to see these results. But why? Was he, like, skeptical of what would happen to the money later, or was it something else?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. The biography kind of suggests he believed that, like, huge fortunes, if they just sat there, could actually do more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. Interesting way to think about it.
Right, like almost counterproductive to just leave money sitting there.
Definitely goes against the grain of how a lot of people thought about it, even today. But we've mostly focused on how he gave. Yeah. What about what he supported besides the schools? The excerpts mentioned he was involved in other areas too, right?
Oh, yeah. Education was huge for him, but his vision was much wider than that. For example, he was a big supporter of the YMCA, especially for Black communities.
Right, and this was back when, like, not everyone was doing that.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't exactly the norm.
Not at all. And these weren't just gyms either. They were community centers, providing resources, programs, all sorts of things.
Yeah, from the excerpts, it seemed like they were vital, especially at that time.
Totally. Safe spaces, educational opportunities, even job training, crucial stuff when you think about what Black communities were up against back then.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just money either, right? He was involved even talking to President Taft about supporting the YMCAs.
Exactly. He used his influence to try to make things happen at the highest levels.
Wow. The biography also mentioned housing, which, man, that's a tough one to tackle even now, let alone back then with segregation and everything.
For sure. Decent, affordable housing, especially for marginalized communities, it's a challenge no matter when you're trying to do it. But it was something Rosenwald felt strongly about.
Do we know much about those projects? Like what he was actually doing?
The excerpts mostly focused on the education stuff, so details are a bit thin there. But knowing Rosenwald and how hands-on he was, it's safe to assume he brought that same energy to those efforts, too.
Making sure things were actually getting better for people, not just, like, writing a check and walking away.
Exactly. It all comes back to that, doesn't it? His business sense wasn't just about the numbers. It was about creating systems that worked.
And it's interesting because that same approach, he applies it to giving, you know? Like, it's not enough to just have good intentions. You got to have a plan. You got to be involved. You got to be willing to, like, get your hands dirty to make a real difference.
Absolutely. And to do it now, not later, which I think that's something really powerful to think about, even today.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, what kind of impact could you have if you brought that same energy to the things you care about, you know? Yeah. So we covered a lot of ground about Julius Rosenwald, the businessman, the philanthropist, the guy who believed in action over just, like, words on a page.
Yeah, and who knew that the Sears guy would have such a fascinating story, right?
Right. He really wanted to use what he had to make a difference. And like we talked about before, he was really set on giving while he was still alive to see the effects. He felt very strongly that large fortunes could cause more problems than they solve if they were left to just sit around. So as you go about your day today, maybe think about this. What do you think about giving while living? Is that something that resonates with you, especially today? It's definitely something to ponder as we all try to create our own legacies.